Live. We are live and recording. Yes, we are. Hi, everybody. Welcome. So my name is Matt Bussey. I'm the festival manager for the Gershwin Philadelphia Jewish Film Festival. We hope you enjoyed Sammy Davis Jr. Now, I've only been working here for 4 years, but I can say this is probably one of our most popular films ever that we've shown. This, I think, is our third time showing it, and we'd love to do it every time. It's such a wonderful film. He's an amazing, rest in peace, was an amazing icon. And thank you also so much. As you know, this is our last film in our Shared Stories 4-part virtual film series that we started. And it's been absolutely amazing. The feedback has been great. The movies have been wonderful. We really hope you guys have enjoyed it so much. And yeah, without further ado, I just want to introduce everybody. So moderating this discussion, we have Eugene Haynes. There he is. Yep. He is a professor of film and media arts, of film and media arts at Temple University. We also have Maori Holmes here. She is the founder of the BlackStar Film Festival, which is in Philadelphia. And they recently announced their new dates. They're going to be going virtual as well, like us, August 20th to 26th. Which is very cool. And then lastly, we have Professor Dr. Elliot Ratzman. So if any of you guys were on last week's discussion, Elliot was here for Joaquin Prince, I Shall Not Be Silent. So welcome back, Elliot. And yeah, without further ado, I'll get myself out of here and let you guys talk.
I tell you, who would have thought? I'm gonna go on a little tangent here, but I'm social media, right? Not extreme, but I'm slowly learning because I have 2 kids, right? And I'm getting these reminders, right, of milestones, that come up and everything. And so I'm remembering these times. I'm like, who would have thought that in 2020 that I would be doing this as a way of communicating and stuff. So I'm always mind blown by that. And so I'm letting you know up front that if I do a technical slip up, please forgive me because I'm learning this as we go. But we had a brief moment to kind of round table before we got to you in the green room because we all have green rooms, right? And so I wanted Elliot and Maori to, although Matt did a great job introducing them, just to talk a little bit about who they are and what actually maybe brought them as an interest to, talking about Sammy Davis Jr. and Sam Pollock's thing, and then we can jump into stuff. So Elliot, why don't you go ahead? Sorry.
So I'm Professor Elliot Ratzman. I teach in religion departments around Philadelphia, and I'm working on a book on Jews and anti-racism. But at Temple University, where we all have a connection to, I taught a course, Race and Judaism, for many years. Professor Laura Levitt now teaches it. And I was part of Lewis Gordon's Afro-Jewish Studies Center. In my courses on Jews and race, we talk about Jews of color, converts to Judaism, and the boundaries between religion and race. Stop that.
Okay, how about you, Maori?
So I was invited by Olivia. That's why I'm here. But I am a film curator and a programmer and run BlackStar and and deeply invested in Black popular culture historically. And so this was really great. I hadn't seen the film, believe it or not, and so I was happy to have the opportunity to do so and to think about Sammy Davis Jr. is such an important figure, and I think it's easy to forget how people came to be, and I just loved being reminded about circumstances and sometimes I marvel at what people were able to do with so many boundaries and parameters versus sometimes it feels like with kind of not absolute freedom, but with a lot more leeway, not being as mobile in some ways. It's kind of incredible.
And
Agile is maybe the word.
Right, fragile, right. And so I'm just blessed by the universe. I am connected to Olivia on LinkedIn, among other things. I think I've had some interns do some work with the film festival in the past, and when it came to the offer to talk about film, I was definitely excited and all in with that. And then to make it with Sammy Davis Jr. and have this forum, right, where it's this Jewish Black perspective, I thought, well, wow, it would be great for me to jump in with that. And so, like with that, as the introduction had said, Maori, I know you are the founder and architect of BlackStar, and and I know this is a film festival, so I'm assuming that there are cinephiles out there that are familiar with Sam Pollard's work. But I know that we had a connection in a master's class with Sam Pollard, and I was wondering, after you had seen this film, was there anything by way of what we could do right by Sam to like say about the film that he would have said, or in a stylistic way, kind of like what this one represents versus is different from For Little Girls or something like that, from a film perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I feel like I can do that. Sam's body of work is immense.
Exactly,
and
it's immense, right?
Not only as a director, but as an editor. I mean, you mentioned Four Little Girls, and it was interesting. I was sort of looking through his IMDb and just seeing what I love with people's careers, particularly when they are long, is that you see the points of entry for them. And so I think him making films about both Jewish life and Black life and the entertainment industry prior to this project probably gave him lots of access. And so I thought that was just something interesting. But yeah, I mean, I know Sam Pollard's work primarily from his work with Spike Lee on Girl 6 and, Jungle Fever, Mo Better Blues, et cetera, et cetera. And then have gotten to know him as a director more recently through the work that has been presented at BlackStar, quite honestly. So, Mr. Soul, seeing Maynard, even though we didn't end up screening it. We did show his film on August Wilson, The Ground on Which I Stand. And so seeing those projects with him as director has, also sort of given another perspective. And of course, we've had him as a guest at the festival. And then also getting to know his son, Jason, who himself is also an editor and prolific editor and becoming a director as well. So, I mean, I don't feel like he's not someone whose work I can, speak in the voice of, but he's definitely obviously an important editor, particularly of documentary film.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And students of docs or students of narratives, but looking at this documentary prism, I think if you haven't heard of Sinclair Bourne, if you haven't, saw other Sam Pollard things, the American Masters series, are great opportunities, now that we're not in the theaters, literally, that you can have access and really unpack some of those things. One of the things that I've heard and I really recognized when I revisited this is how Sam was able to do this 90-minute thing with no narration, literally, like Sammy Davis Jr. is actually, telling the story. And from a craftsman's perspective, I thought that I would just mention that was an appreciative thing for me. Now, Elliot, I know that Sammy Davis, he's a unique character to look at through Sam's prism, and I had asked if you are able to, use some of those discussions about his Judaism as it begins to introduce topics in your coursework with, Judaism and race.
Well, I think the way that the documentary opens with the embrace of Nixon is probably the least Jewish thing Sammy Davis Jr. ever did. 81% of American Jews voted against Nixon in the first election in '68. And then 65% of Jews voted against Nixon in '72, still doubling the amount of the rest of the national average. So his embrace of Nixon for a minute, apparently there, really was a shock to me, because what attracted Davis to Judaism, as you saw in the film, but I'll tell you a few other things that didn't get into the film, was that he was really impressed with the Jewish emphasis on justice. And the books he was reading that rabbis were giving him while he was sort of identifying as a Jew but not going through any formal conversion for a few years had to do with the suffering of Jews, the resilience of Jews through the centuries, and their continual emphasis on justice. He is embracing Reform Judaism in the 50s and 60s at a time when the agenda of Reform Judaism was front and center racial justice, economic justice, and later anti-war ideas, and a kind of progressive relationship to Israel and Zionism. So I think the aspects of Judaism that he was attracted to, and also the charismatic rabbis that he was encountering, and the Jewish performers, producers, gatekeepers, men around him, were aspects of Judaism that I think a lot of us are still celebrating today. This progressive Judaism that is committed in even imperfect ways and symbolic ways towards racial and economic justice. And Sammy Davis Jr. also saw the resilience and is part of a longer tradition of African Americans relating to the story of the Jews, of the Israelites of the Old Testament, the Jews of modern life. And so I wish the film had sort of cultivated a little bit more of Sammy Davis Jr.'s relationship with Judaism. And we'll get to one of the questions, I think, here in a bit about what else is he doing.
I'm trying to remember if it was one of the books that it was Black Like Me, or one of those books where, you know, the expanse of his life. And I think as an auteur, you're always challenged with personality types like this, where you have to do something in 90 minutes and tell, you know, in a sense, what would be, you'd tell in a sense, that's a great book. Telling in a sense, you know, like, what do you tell from this person's life, you know, that can expand from like 1925 to I forget when exactly he passed, in the 90s perhaps, you know, that's 64 years lifespan, of which 60 was an entertainer. You know, like that's like a mind-blowing thing. But you had mentioned one thing that was key in this relationship, the Black-Jewish relationship, specifically as it relates to Black Americans. You know, I mentioned that we were generationally, you know, separate, but I wanted to ask the two of you if you could remember the first familiarity with Sammy Davis Jr. Like, how did that come about? Mayor, do you recall when that first?
Yeah, what's coming to mind is actually not Sammy Davis Jr., but Billy Crystal. I think I wasn't allowed to watch a lot of television, but the consistent thing in my house was Saturday Night Live every week. And so I think I saw impressions of Sammy Davis Jr. before I saw him. And then it was definitely seeing him on, you know, some of those, like, you know, Bob Hope specials were still on when I was younger. I'm born in 78, so I'm not that much younger than you. But I feel like, you know, some of those big TV things, I don't remember him being in any films until later that I like learned and went back. I don't remember seeing him in any contemporary films, but maybe. But yeah, that's the first thing that came to mind, is just thinking of Billy Crystal doing "You Look Marvelous" and, you know, sort of imitating him. But I do remember my grandmother, my mother's mother, had a very strong opinions about performers who were respectable and who were not. And Sammy Davis Jr. was respectable, you know, and so he was someone to whose career I think she was interested in. I don't know how she felt about him politically, but in terms of where he performed and the work ethic that he had, I remember hearing about him from her.
How about you, Elliot?
My parents, I think, called to, who are out in the audience, I should say. My parents called attention to Sammy Davis Jr. To me and my brother, I think, is part of a longer story of of like, look how cool Jews are, or look at the great Jews around us, even Sammy Davis Jr. And of course, an African-American Jew for most Ashkenazi Jews is an anomaly. And so the idea that Jews were also of African descent wasn't so strange to me growing up. In my day school, there was a few African-American Jews. There was a Japanese-American Jew, Argentinian-American Jew. So the idea that Jews were multicultural had Sammy Davis Jr. as a kind of unofficial symbol. And I think that was important to note, that he wasn't, for many of us, and I can't say for most, but for many of us, Sammy Davis Jr. also represented the diversity of Jews. It was a fact. It wasn't an anomaly or an exception. And I think that was important for me growing up.
Yeah, she's my great aunt, right? But I would spend the weekends with her and my Uncle Bobby. And this was in an era where I could be the remote control. So I always loved, like being over there and spending time, because the house was mine. They didn't have any kids. I was their one and only. And I remember they would watch Lawrence Welk. They would watch Hee Haw. They would watch all these shows. And I remember it was either Ed Sullivan or one of those shows, and Sammy Davis Jr. would come on, and he would do his little bit, and I would be like, oh, okay. But then it wasn't until there was a film, which is one of my favorite films of all time, and I'm not Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the first one with Gene Wilder, and that song that he sings, the Candyman. I can remember I'm in the car, the radio's playing, and Sammy Davis Jr. and I'm like, that's Willy Wonka. And my mother's like, no, that's Sammy Davis Jr., right? So we've got all of these different snapshots. And then I thought at the end of the film, it was really brilliant, because it's 30 years since he's passed. 30 years. That's a grown person's lifespan that doesn't even have a certain like recall with his imprint. And so people like Michael Jackson, which would be more familiar with someone maybe that then Michael Jackson gets his Michael Jacksondom from Sammy Davis Jr. in a model kind of way. So this continuity thing, which brings us to like a question that's here from the audience, and it is about Sammy Davis Jr. wearing blackface. And do we have any insights as a panel, on that?
Yeah, and Eugene, who you just mentioned that Michael Jackson was imitating Sammy Davis Jr., but he wasn't exactly imitating Sammy Davis Jr. Right? No. They're both in a style of the sort of Chitlin Circuit or minstrel performance.
They're outliers.
And
exactly.
Well, not necessarily outliers, but I mean, there's a whole continuum of performers dancing in that style and dressing the way that they did. And so blackface, Sammy Davis Jr. is coming out of that same tradition. And that was a part of it in its in the early part of the 20th century, obviously. And so I think to the person who's asking, I mean, Sammy Davis Jr., I don't think chose to wear blackface. He was putting on the costume that was presented to him, particularly as a child. And even as an early performer, that's what everyone did. It came out of this, style, right? That was part of the legacy that began in enslavement and continued into the early part of the 20th century. And so that was an expectation of a certain performance, vaudeville, right? That's what one did.
There's a debate about the particularly Jewish performers who take up blackface. Al Jolson, and then later Eddie Cantor, who was so influential and important for Sammy Davis Jr. The early Irish use of blackface in the 19th century was seen as mostly contemptuous of African American culture, whereas there is some debate in the scholarly literature about American Jews taking on blackface as identifying with otherness, or is it identifying with the whiteness that allows the blackface to happen? Mm-hmm. So it's blackface in its context in the 20s, 30s, on the waves of jazz singer and post jazz singer.
Right.
Is this tribute to a certainly now problem we all recognize to be super problematic, but is it then a way of Jews relating to the otherness of Black Americans, or is it a way of Jews becoming more white, right? We are white as Jews, and so we can do blackface as well.
Or is it neither? I mean, is it an entree? Is it entree into a performance, you know, into a system that this is an acceptable entree into this industry, right? And because there are Black people who also wore blackface, right? Like Sammy Davis Jr., but so many others, because these were, it's kind of like when we talk about the characters that are available, let's say up until 10 years ago, every Black and brown actor has to make a choice of whether or not they'll play a criminal on Law and Order, right? Because that is the role that's available. And so similarly, you know, for 100 years prior, there was blackface, and that was what you did if you were interested in singing and dancing. And I think also at a particular level, that was popular culture, right? Like that was our hip hop. That was nothing else going on. I mean, that's what people danced to. That's what they were interested in. A lot of our earliest recordings are recordings of these performances. So I think whoever is asking, there's an excellent episode of 1619 that I think it's episode 3 with Wesley Morris from the New York Times that goes into, they actually go from blackface to yacht rock, which I love. But it's a very interesting, you know, just sort of giving us a grounding in how music, how popular music is constructed in this country.
Yeah.
Could you put that in the comments, that reference?
Sure.
It's
great.
again like this character portrayal, right, of this coon or the Tom. You know, I remember the stories of hearing about Burt Williams' story. You know, here it is. He's got a brilliant play on Broadway. Comes out, all the rest of his compadres are like, yes, let's meet for drinks at Sardi's, right? He can't even get into Sardi's until one of his white friends comes and lets him in. And then I think it was, you know, this early on when Sammy gets in and is playing in the movies with Ethel Waters and all these people that they have skilled him. He's a sponge. He's been able to watch and look at exactly what we're saying about it's the portrayal of this character type. And I just was in amazement in thinking that, you know, we're going through a similar like depression now, and how artists are really trying to redefine and try to, you know, re-navigate things. And it was thinking about how Sammy Davis Jr. was able to still maintain and be an entertainer through the Great Depression. Yeah, in part doing that blackface, that minstrelsy performance type of thing that you know, like really a lot of people couldn't get into or not get into, but couldn't maintain, and that this ability for him to maintain and is just fascinating on a prism of how a character can trap the artist.
There's also this dimension of racial ambiguity here, because not only was Sammy Davis Jr. African American descent, he was also, mother was also Puerto Rican, and when he started becoming a Jew, he made this into a kind of shtick, so that he was his oppression, he would joke, is compounded, but also his racial fluidity, maybe that it's not an ambiguity. Racial fluidity was there in the way that also, like Eddie Cantor, Al Jolson, these Jewy Jews changed their names to like waspify their names so that they wouldn't be instantly identifiable as Jews. So now, you know, white Jews can do that. Jews of color, it's more problematic. So I think there's this degree of racial ambiguity. And another performer, Prince, that I was thinking about the whole time watching this, where Prince, Sammy Davis Jr. and Prince, able to do all these sorts of musical feats of genius, playing all the instruments, doing all the dancing. He also played with racial ambiguity or fluidity, claiming at some point falsely that he was of partially Italian descent. And I should also note, you can't tell my audience out there, but I'm really short. And so the height of these folks was also, I think, a crucial thing. Davis is 5'5", Prince is 5'3", and so their smallness, I think, also adds to their complexity of their their stage performance. And that's something I noticed, that in the way that he was interacting with the Brat Pack as really a very small man, I think that had something to do with some of his persona.
Yeah, I know. Maybe we should unpack a little bit more of this this thought on how in America Judaism and blackness can be defined both as race. You know, I think that's like we've been talking about fluidity in Elliot, your perception of Sammy being able to be fluid between these cultures, but using the storytelling of a common denominator of inclusion. You know, quite honestly, man, it wasn't until college that I really got to know some Jewish people. You know, and that if I thought of how many Black people do I know that practice Judaism, you know what I mean, it would be on a shorthand, because that's just how it is. But I think that interchanging of the struggles, right, being equivalent to like racial struggles.
Let me do this really quickly. So, like in Europe, Ashkenazi Jews are definitely, and Sephardi Jews are definitely racialized, made into a race, thought of as a group apart, obvious who they are, and once discovered that they really are Jewish, there are forms of exclusion through law, through social custom. Coming to America, Jews just kind of mostly, not all, but Ashkenazi Jews disappear into whiteness. But American Jews have always been uncomfortable just disappearing into whiteness because they want to make sure that they are distinct from everybody else. They don't intermarry, there's endogamy. And so Jews in America are treated shabbily, but there's not a formal legal racial exclusion by law like there is with Asians, with African Americans, with Native Americans. So Jews in America have this kind of different perspective about it. But this sensitivity to racialization or racism sort of primes some, not all, and there's lots of racist Jews, a lot of Jews into being concerned with the affairs of African Americans, especially in the South. And they're groomed for this in the 20s and 30s. And so Jews' encounters with African Americans are also because Jews are mostly urban people. Jews are also coming into the burgeoning entertainment industries on the coast. And so the connections between Blacks and Jews are bittersweet, but important, and it becomes a sticking point and an issue within Jewish American life, thinking about what is our relationship to race. How is it that we understand ourselves with African American world? And that's a narrative that continues, passes through the civil rights movement as many Jews become part of the support staff, the lawyers, the fundraisers, and the volunteers, the white volunteers. So this is a topic for Jews. I don't think the Irish have little discussions about, oh, what is our relationship to the African American experience? But Jews are constantly thinking about this, and I think this is significant, something to build on, even if it's imperfect. Maori, your work in the film world, a lot of Jews are in the world of film as well as gatekeepers. What do you feel like you have also this narrative operating in the people you're encountering?
I would never make any broad strokes in this way. I mean, I was listening to you and I was thinking that what you're presenting, I think, is definitely sort of like a popular understanding of Jewish and Black relations, but it obviously is more layered than that. There were, of course, Jewish slaveholders. There are also Black ones. So the relationship doesn't only begin in the late 1800s. It goes all the way back to the 1700s. And so I feel like there's that sort of legacy that is also there. And I grew up in West Hollywood, so different than Eugene. I mean, I feel like the first white people that I knew were Jewish. But I also spent a lot of time in the South. I went to high school in Atlanta, and I felt like actually in both places, differently than when I came to the East Coast, there was a real sense among people that I met, that they did not, I mean, like you said, it wasn't formal, but there were definitely exclusionary practices, right? So there was a shared sense of that you could be, sort of predated by the clan, right? Like there was there was danger in your existence. There was also exclusion from clubs and exclusions from other kinds of, fraternizing institutions. And so, I definitely knew people who had a real sense of the reason that not only because of the spiritual tradition being related to justice, and then also the history of communism and Black Americans finding their voice in that and thinking about Robeson and Du Bois and, sort of all those relationships there. So there's so many points of entry to talk about it. And yes, I mean, obviously there are lots of people of Jewish descent and Jewish faith in Hollywood. And I worked in the music industry for a long time too. So I feel like I'm always thinking about these things. But I don't think about it now, like in this way. I think about it, I think more so historically. I think the most interesting thing that comes up for me about Sammy Davis Jr. is this idea that he was fluid. I think that he felt fluid, but if we look in the film, he kept facing these hurdles based upon how he looked, right? And so that means he actually wasn't fluid, right? And that's the thing that distinguishes Black people in this country from everyone else, is that no matter your talent, no matter your money, no matter the access, there continues to be these barriers, right? And so even if we think about a contemporary context, when they talk about like Black maternal health, or they talk about, being stopped by the cops, it could be the wealthiest Black woman with, PhDs. The doctors are still going to treat her poorly and not listen to her and assume that she's strong and all of these things, right? And that's all about how people see you, and it has nothing to do with the experience. So I actually question how fluid Sammy Davis Jr. is. One of the funny things that I felt like I didn't know that he had been married to that Black woman. I had only heard, very casual references to his love of white women by, just sort of older people in my family would talk about him and Quincy Jones in the same breath. And so sort of like, that was something that I had not known before I watched it, which was interesting.
Yeah. So Elliot, see, here we go. So Louis would like to know if Sammy Davis Jr. was a part of any specific Jewish community or perhaps other communities.
Yeah, it's a great question. From what I've dug up, he did attend services. As you saw in the film, there was a story of him refusing to work on Yom Kippur. Now, every Jewish kid in America grows up hearing about the baseball player Sandy Koufax not playing in the World Series on the high holidays. But this film was the first time I heard that Sammy Davis Jr. wouldn't work on the high holidays. So he did attend services. He did read a lot. He was a voracious reader. He did a lot of fundraising for Israel. Now, this sounds like the snapshot of a Reformed Jew in the 1960s. You go to a synagogue twice a year. You raise money for Israel. Maybe you make a trip to Israel, as he did. He met Moshe Dayan, who also has an eye patch, and there were some jokes around that. I think there was a maybe apocryphal joke that Diane said, "You want to look like half a Jew to me," or something like that, I think referring to the eye patch. So Davis Jr. was tied into the Jewish community. He performed at Israel at 30, the 2-hour special that was on network television in 1978. So he was as connected as most probably American Reform Jews are. I'm not sure if he was part of a congregation regularly, but his identification with the Jewish people and the Jewish religion, it's significant and certainly as authentic as anything, and shouldn't be disparaged. What was questioned, though, was that when his Swedish fiance suddenly converted to Judaism, right? So there was a lot of hate mail sent to the rabbi who did the accelerated conversion of my Brit when they were about to get married. They made a last-minute decision to do that. And there was some implication in the Ebony interview with him in 1958, I think, that he had another white woman he was dating, and she was debating whether she was going to convert to Judaism. So becoming a Jewish spouse was important enough for Sammy Davis Jr., but American Jews thought it was a little unkosher that as there were white Jews who had intermarriages where there was quickie conversions, but Sammy Davis Jr. didn't get a pass because they didn't quite see him, I believe, as completely Jewish, and that's regrettable.
I just had a thought in relation to travel, right? As it relates then to perspective on opening up your perspectives to seeing the world in a much bigger way. So my initial part of the question is, Elliot, do you think, or what is the percentage of Jewish Americans that never leave, that have never gone abroad, that don't make the travel to Israel? And on the other side, Maori, in relation to how many then Black Americans are able then to, by way of going abroad, get a better picture on what their Blackness is as it relates to being a Black American. Because I thought that, Sammy had said in that with the Nixon thing, he thought to be American, but that then when he was making the statement to that crowd of Black people, that he says, listen, now you may not like me for what it is, but I'm Black, and that's what that is. So how important is travel in relation to this understanding between Black and Jewish perspectives on Jewish Americans and Black Americans?
Just to maybe sharpen it down to Sammy Davis Jr.'s travel to Israel, he definitely, it was a incredible experience for him. He was greeted with singers, and he was feted in highest office. He met all these celebrities. He was invited back to give concerts, which he never did, but he said he wouldn't charge for them. He would just go and do it. He sang Exodus, one of the theme songs from Exodus. So at the time, I should also note that the idea of the state of Israel as the Jewish homeland was very, and in some ways, liberal progressive idea at the time. This was before our current moment where that has come into question. And so Sammy Davis's relationship to the state of Israel sort of cohered with his sense of like a spunky people trying to overcome oppression and to establish a home of their own. So I think that was important for him, that he was also greeted as a Jew. Now, technically, African-American converts to Judaism do have sometimes treated shabbily by the state of Israel. There are African-American Judaic groups that their Judaism is put into question. Even the Ethiopian Jews, who don't come to Israel until the late 70s and early 80s, even their Judaism was put into question. So there's a lot of sort of what you might say anti-Black racism within even the Jewish world. And that is a real big subject that lots of Jews are talking about. Let me just mention one scandal. Just this week, the Rabbinic Council of America, which represents those 15% of Orthodox Jews, they decided to have a panel debating Black Lives Matter, and they decided to have no African-American rabbis. There are African-American Orthodox rabbis, and it was an all-white panel. Now that's terrible, but what was great was that so many people jumped on their Facebook page and typed in upset comments that it was overwhelming. So this has been a real rallying cry. So yes, there's racism, and then parts of the community respond to it, and hopefully a large part of the community understands the importance of being anti-racist.
I don't remember the question, so I don't know.
Just in terms of how travel, right, affects Black Americans as it relates to entertainers. Looking at Sammy Davis Jr., is it an important factor of his evolution of sort? I think that sometimes when you're able to see how other people see you it gives you a much better picture of yourself. And I'm wondering if you sensed any of that in either what we've seen in the doc or from what you know about Sammy's his evolution of Blackness.
I think that what is more likely is that Sammy had a clear sense of who he is as a Black person, right? Like you bring up, he's born in 1925 in Harlem. And if we think about the spiritual and political movements that are surrounding him, if we think about Garveyism, we think about the Nation of Islam, we think about even Rastafarian movements, which are also kind of a Judaic movement. If we think about all this stuff that's happening, he had to be witnessing it because all those brothers are on the street corner, you know, sort of like wherever you're walking. So I think that he probably got more comfortable the more money that he had and the more established he was as a performer to be more honest about himself is what I'm thinking. I also imagine that he felt, and I think it was expressed in the doc to some degree, that because he hadn't had a formal education, he struck me as someone who was always learning and always kind of open to new information. And so I think his evolution, I mean, I have met some of the most traveled people who are incredibly ignorant. So I don't believe that travel opens people's eyes. It can, but I think sometimes people also they still see the same. You know, they travel somewhere else and they're still bringing their lens with them. So some people, it does open their eyes. But what I think for Sammy is that there was a combination of being a constant learner because of that deficit that he perceived in himself. And then also, you know, being born into a time where things are shifting rapidly. And I think he's not the only person, right? Like, I think many people, I mean, if we think about what Black people call themselves in this country between 1925 and 1990, like just, you know, we have like 6 names in that time. So, you know, I think everyone's evolution was changing. So he's just an emblem as well.
Right. I'm always amazed at these people like Sammy Davis Jr. who have been able to find something that they love very early on and do that in spite of any other obstacle. And then you get a chance to look at their story and you see the people that they interact with and you're like, oh my God, there'll never be another Sammy Davis Jr. You know, in that sense of timing with the people who he engaged with or was surrounded by. Like, clearly there are going to be other entertainers, but that the Sammy Davis Jr. experience from the Lafayette Theater, that's the Lafayette Players, that's Charles Gilpin, that's all these people that are right there. He's in the side. You know, like he's
Eugene, I just want to trouble that just a little bit. I mean, you're saying he did something he loved. Did he have an option? I don't know that he had another option. I feel like, you know, he was born into this practice and this was all he knew. You know, it's literally the only training he had.
Well, I think that by virtue of his life, in terms of him picking up instruments, tap dancing, singing, performing, that each one of those in and of itself is a Herculean task of and of, you know, just to tap the equivalent of the Nicholas brothers, or one of the Nicholas brothers, you know, just to be on that level alone with just that one thing is in some ways, you know, could be someone's career. But I say that because Sammy Davis Jr. was able to master several of these different things. And I think that is where I'm getting at with this relationship of being in the midst of this going on. That you're not only looking at tap dancers, you're looking at Bill Bojangles Robinson. You know, you're not only getting ready for movie performance, but it's Eddie Cantor's. It's like saying, listen, you gotta do this on TV. They love this, you know, and using all of those particular things to make him who he was. It was really fascinating.
I like to say, just in closing for me, that we should also call attention to that yesterday was James Baldwin's birthday. And James Baldwin is one of the people we should be reading. Also a very small person. He will go in my forthcoming book, Great Short Men of the 20th Century, along with Sammy Davis Jr., Martin Luther King. And that picture of him, of Davis with Baldwin and King backstage from Golden Boy, that was priceless. I wish they would get a postcard or a poster of that. So I just want to give a shout out to James Baldwin. Uncle Bobby's bookstore is opening tomorrow, so go get your James Baldwin books. He is one of the great American writers in all time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so are we getting close? Because I want.
Yeah.
Okay. So Maori, I know there are a few things that you'd like to say, or maybe reminders to people, maybe.
You can also say them, Eugene. Yeah, I just hopefully you all will join us for BlackStar Film Festival. We will start August 20th and end August 26th. Primarily online, we will have 3 drive-through screenings. This film is making me think about another that people may be interested in. We'll be screening Be Water, which is about Bruce Lee, another amazing kind of human feat of a person who was born into his career as well, which I didn't know until I saw the documentary that he had been a child actor as well. His father had been in the opera, and I just think it's really interesting when someone's bringing up Michael Jackson again. It's sometimes I wonder, like, my mother is a hippie and she would say you choose these parents, but I do think it's something. I don't know if they would be who they were if they hadn't had their parents, sitting them down at 3 or 4 and keeping them rehearsing. You know what I mean? It wasn't just like a natural. It's the combination of a natural ability and then this incredible ethic and discipline.
The 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
The 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Thanks. I guess so. So what do you just say?
I'm back. Yeah, I'm back. If you guys have any lasting things to say, yeah. Is that all?
I hope everybody was cool. You know what I mean? With everything.
Awesome.
I had a good time.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Thanks,
well, thank you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Elliot.
Yeah, thank you all so much for this. This was amazing. This also, like all of our past Crowdcast interviews, it is recorded, and we are going to post it tomorrow on our social media sites, and you'll also get an e-blast with this as well. So, and it gets saved automatically here on Crowdcast, so you can watch it. But yes, thank you again. Thank you everybody so much for attending tonight, and also for attending the previous 3 films. Thank you, Maori, Eugene, Elliot. You guys are amazing. This was a wonderful discussion. And yeah, spread the word. Yes, I posted the link many times, but yes, BlackStar Film Festival, August 20th to 26th. And yes.
Oh, that's cool. I'm raising you up, man.
It does look like that.
Yeah, that's what. Oh.
Anyway, thank you guys so much. And yes, if you have any questions or anything, just give us a call, or you can email us info@pjff.org. We have another really exciting announcement coming later this week. Wink, wink. So definitely stay tuned for that. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.